And I think that one of those things that, in terms of growing out of patterns that you have, is that you have to see it in a new way. And which is one of those reasons why when a person's like, oh yeah, I've already done this before, I've tried this before, I tried awareness, it didn't really work. You know what I'm saying? That's a person for whom it isn't going to work, because they're not watching and they're not really curious, because they think that seeing it the way they've always seen it is seeing it in the only way that there is to see it. But if there's something in my life that's going wrong, or if there's something about what it's like to be me that isn't great, or something that I'm doing that's not working, despite the fact that it's not working, I'm continuing to do it, right? I'm obviously not really fully seeing it for what it is. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's that willingness to like, you know, that was one of the real things for me that allowed stuff to start changing in my life. That was really persistent problems that I had in my own experience, my own problems. Certain things just used to piss me off like so much. You know, it was a virtually involuntary kind of rage response. That's what it felt like. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I kept watching it in exactly the same way, I kept watching it, that I eventually saw things that I didn't see the first time. It's like watching a crime scene, like a security footage. You know, like the cop that's doing the investigation. And if you begin with this, you know, and it's like the people who are really tenacious and who win things. If you're an attorney, or if you're, I don't know, if you're like a coach analyzing a football play, or if you're a police officer watching some kind of an investigator, you know what I mean? You watch the tape, you don't see anything. What do you conclude when you watch the tape and you don't see anything of substance? Do you say, oh, there's nothing there? Or do you say, I didn't see the key thing, I didn't see the important thing? If you assume that the case is solvable and you haven't solved it yet, it's because what? It's because you're missing something that's available to you. But if you're kind of pompous, you know, if you're full of yourself, or if you just have that, a lot of the times it's not even like that kind of, people think, you know, you're pompous and you think that it's a person who's deliberately just sort of, you know, they think they know everything. That's really not the case. It's just a matter of the meanings that a person assigns by default to a situation where they have sort of watched what they're doing, or sort of tried to change and not succeeded, or not found anything. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But if I assume there's something there, and if I'm convinced that finding what's there, finding that experientially relevant component is the key to creating the change that I want, I'll watch and I'll look until I see it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things for me in working with people, or like when we're having a conversation about something, that relentlessness, you know, comes from that certainty. This is that there's something here I'm not seeing, or there's something here maybe that you're not seeing, or there's something about how I can describe what I'm seeing to you that will allow you to see it too. And I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing that way of describing it yet. But I know it's here. I know it exists. I know that there's something about, I know that what hasn't worked so far in this conversation and in this attempt on my part to create an understanding between us, or within myself, or within you, right? There's something about what hasn't worked that's trying to tell me something about what will work instead. And that conviction is kind of like what curiosity is made out of. And that's the thing, like when you watch it, you create the magical transformation moment. This is the awareness in and of itself is transformative. And, you know, someone might hear that and they might think, okay, so if I do the awareness challenge, my whole life is going to be better instantly. That's not necessarily the case. What we're talking about is a particular type of awareness and of a particular part of your experience, active at a particular point in your experiential process, changes that process in fundamental ways if the process isn't serving you. I have to see what I'm doing, and this is like the whole hindsight is 20/20 thing, you know? Like, if I'm in a particular state of consciousness, you know, mindset, mood, whatever, what else might you call that? You know what I'm saying? If you're in a place that's causing you to think and feel and act in ways that don't serve you, or you know, in which you think in ways that construct kind of emotional environments inside yourself that make it possible for you to do things that you would normally consider unacceptable, that your partner considers unacceptable, that simply maybe just elicits from your reality results that you don't want. You're in that state, you do those things, and then, you know, that state kind of has a natural half-life, and it sort of, basically you're in a different mood the next day, a week later, sometime later, something happens, you burn off the bad feelings, whatever. Then you look back and there's that kind of mental artifact, the memory of the things that you said and did. It might be not totally accurate, but you have some recollection of doing some pretty hurtful or outrageous or unresourceful things. And it's not hard for you to see that those things don't serve you in retrospect, right? And so that's not useful, because if, for example, you were in one of your more resourceful states and I described the behavior that you engage in when you're in one of your less resourceful states, assuming you hadn't even done it, let's just say that I described it to you as a hypothetical here, someone does this and says this to their partner and talks to themselves this way, you would easily, in your best, most resourceful state, you would recognize that as not useful. And so the problem isn't that you don't recognize that what doesn't serve you when you're at your smartest and at your best and at your most tuned in. The problem is that you have the capacity to get into states where you don't have access to that understanding, right? Where it isn't obvious to you that this isn't resourceful. Or maybe it's not obvious to you that the fact that this thing isn't resourceful means that it's worth not doing. Those are two different things. Some people, they don't see that it's not going to serve them. Other people, they get into states where the fact that it's obviously not going to serve them isn't a strong reason to not do it. It's not relevant, because that's not their criteria for deciding what to do. Is it going to serve me? Is it not? Their criteria is, do they deserve it, right? Or do I deserve it? Or, do I feel bad enough to do what doesn't serve me, or whatever? And so what has to happen is the awareness has to sort of activate and come online when you're in the state. You have to see it while you're doing it. That's what breaks the spell. That's what makes the state less magical, That's when you see, you see the persuasion, the persuasion strategy, right? That sort of unconsciously runs and gets you to do things that aren't in your interest, that you don't maybe even want to do, that aren't consistent with your values, that don't create results that you want, etc. You see that for what it is. And you have to see it not in retrospect. Oh yeah, now in retrospect I can see he was lying to me and just trying to get me to sleep with him. Oh yeah, now in retrospect I can see that he was just lying to me and telling me what I wanted to hear, or playing on my emotions, or taking advantage of my good nature, or taking advantage of my vulnerability, or all that. Well, it doesn't do you a hell of a lot of good to see it in retrospect, People talk about learning from their mistakes, but the thing is, if they get into a new situation, and that new situation is fundamentally the same in terms of the impact it's going to have in their life, right? But it's different in terms of the veneer of the content. It's a different person who's doing the manipulating, or it's a slightly different context. The person who's asking you to go against your interest and do something for them is in worse shape than the last guy, and so therefore it seems different. You know what I'm saying? He got arrested again, but he didn't mean to do it. He really was in the wrong. All this bullshit that makes it seem different, even though it's the exact same shit. That stuff will be persuasive to you until you're in the moment where it's being done to you, and you see it, and you don't just see it, but you see it really for what it is. That's when you're running these internal programs, or when these internal programs are running, and you have an awareness moment right then and there. You see the program, you see where the program is pointing you. You see that you don't want to go there, and yet you also see inside yourself how you go about being persuaded by that. You recognize the whole thing, so you're not just seeing it as the person being manipulated, but seeing it as something other than what it is. You're actually seeing it for what it actually is, which is a whole bunch of bullshit designed to con you into doing things that aren't going to serve you. And when you see it like that, while it's happening to you, I really think what happens in the brain is this kind of magical, it's like a moment of conception when the new you is conceived, because there's a part of you that's still persuaded by that old stuff, but there's also a new part of you that is created in that moment that is not persuaded by it. And then the next time it happens, you'll be in the same state, and 80% of you will probably be persuaded, but there'll be 20% of you that was born out of a recognition of what bullshit this was last time, that will be active and online during that whole process. And that's growing a new brain, that's growing a new personality, that's growing personal freedom, that's growing that capacity for conscious choice. When there's it's almost as though this awareness thing allows you to kind of reach into the future and to appropriate the insight that you would normally only have in retrospect. You know what I'm saying? And it allows you basically to take that kind of future insight and apply it in real time, so that you can make a new choice now when it matters. And I think that's one of those magical things, is how can I help myself? How can I help somebody else come online and see what they're doing while they're doing it? How can we facilitate that, this kind of tactical activation of awareness in a critical moment? How can we engineer that epiphany How can we make it clear to them? Not make them believe it, not convince them that it's true, not, whether it's positive or negative or in their interest or mine. It's still kind of a manipulation in a way. It's still, I want them to see something in a new way for themselves so that there's zero middleman. There's no me involved. There's no what would Steve say. You know what I mean? There's that critical point where they just say, holy shit, look at this. This is that thing that I do. This is that thing that I do that doesn't serve me, that I can't normally recognize until after it's already done. And then I can kind of give, kind of like a vague sketch artist rendering of what it was. But I don't remember exactly what it looked like. I don't remember exactly what it sounded like. I don't remember exactly how I felt. I just remember that the main takeaway was to do something that I now really regret doing. And I remember that I don't know if I knew it wasn't going to serve me, or if I didn't know, or maybe I knew, but the fact that it wasn't going to serve me seemed to kind of be weighted less in my decision-making criteria at the time. It's kind of like, it reminds me of, I had this one weird class, like a civics class in high school, and the lady, she weighted the different tests in this kind of weird and confusing way. So you could get like an A on one, or an A on 2 or 3, and then like bomb another one. And if that other one was weighted differently, it just obliterated your average, And I think for a lot of people, knowledge and decisions and willpower and commitment and all that stuff, it's like they go into a certain state where all of that stuff is weighted so lightly compared to acting on sort of like the emotional impulse of whatever this kind of racket emotion they unconsciously create inside themselves. So it doesn't matter that I told you I wouldn't do it. It didn't matter that I decided, even if I felt this way, I wasn't going to do it. All of that stuff, that slate gets wiped clean. When I'm in that state, none of it matters. That's why the people, they binge or they shoot up or they do whatever they're doing. It's because you can go into a state from which all previous decisions are experientially irrelevant. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't impact my behavior, what I decided before. And in a moment like that, what you need is this awareness to just split that experience open and to see it for what it is. I put myself into a trance here. Oh boy, I interrupted it kind of mid, I interrupted this thing midway. I had a friend named Coit in high school, and it was really funny. He told me a story about how one time he walked in on his older brother having sex with his girlfriend, and his older brother henceforth called him Coitus interruptus, which I think is just absolutely just hilarious. And there's a sense in which when you're running those unconscious patterns, it's almost like, it's almost like there's some sex going on to conceive the Antichrist, right, in your life, to conceive some kind of unwanted result. And awareness opens up the door and says, what's going on in here? And it's like the annoying younger brother. And then it's like everyone has to stop. And you interrupt that kind of conceptive act that's going on. You know what I'm saying?
That was really good.
It's pretty funny. That's cool. If you watch this, I appreciate that. He's hard to get in contact. He's a fun guy, though. But yeah, that's kind of what it's about, is can I interrupt? I mean, there's movies about this, right? Where like, I think, was it The Omen and all this, like where people the cults are trying to kidnap some girl because she's somebody's whatever, and then she's gonna be forced to conceive the Antichrist or whatever. That is kind of like the thing. It's like you're the detective. It's your awareness, and you're trying to prevent these unconscious patterns. That's kind of the cult, that's sort of operating in your mind. This bizarre religious cult that for some reason wants to bring about, I don't know what the fascination with the Antichrist is, but they want to bring it about. I don't know why these patterns want you and I to fight. I don't know why they want us to have a financial situation that mirrors that of our parents, or mirrors something that's close to it, regardless of whether or not that's what we, more than anything in the world, want for ourselves. And yet there do seem to be unconscious patterns and programs that seem to be geared towards generating that, right? So we got a fucking weird cult inside our head that wants to create this stuff. And what you want to do then is interrupt that program. And the way you do it is you catch it in the act. Because that's what really breaks the spell. You see it for what it is, so that when that man, in the suit comes to the door and says, hi, can we come into your home for a few minutes to talk to you about something? You don't see it as a nice man who's like wanting to talk to you about his religion. You say he's a fucking Satanist cult member and he wants to kidnap my daughter so that she's forced to bear the Antichrist. That you're seeing it in a different way. You're seeing it for what it is, right? And that's such a powerful thing for a person, because nobody wants to do what doesn't serve them. Nobody, you know what I mean? And yet everyone does, to one extent or another. So what's the skill that's missing? The skill obviously isn't wanting to do something different, because most everybody would like to do something different, assuming they believe that it was possible. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the ability to do the same old thing, but to look kind of, to be within the bubble of doing the same thing, and to look around inside that bubble and to see it differently, to see it for what it is, and to view the world outside differently, and to see it for what it is too, right? So to be able to see yourself, to be able to see your behaviors, to be able to see your world differently from within the state that causes you to do those same old things. And that's awareness. Awareness splits that thing open and sort of rescues you from those things. It's that ability to be super drunk and know how drunk you are, so that you decide you decide that I'm in no shape to drive my car. You know what I mean? That's a very useful thing. And that's the thing that helps people bust out of these such like bizarre fucking loops of like apologizing to me because of the fact they messed up again. You know what I mean? Or like feeling bad about something that I already told you don't need to feel bad about, at least not to me. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like this kind of, it's weird. And on the other end of the spectrum, there's hostility towards you or towards the world or whatever's going on. These just weird kind of perfunctory psychological maneuvers that so much of a person's life is made out of. It really is just an OCD basically that is so ubiquitous. It's mental, and it's not physical. The rituals are psychological, and they don't manifest as like hand washing or deadbolt turning or whatever. It's something that's so common to everyone that it isn't pathologized. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
These just stupid little I'll feel a little bad. I'll do it, and then I'll feel a little bad about it, and it'll be okay. Or if I feel bad about it 10 times, then I'll know it's time to feel like maybe I won't do it again. And ignore all the evidence that suggests that there's no relationship between how bad I feel about something and the likelihood of me repeating it. And awareness is it's the spell breaker. Byrne talks about this, with life scripts and stuff,
mm-hmm.
that there's a spell breaker, and the way that he described it was sort of like derailing the games. But what happens when you derail a person's games? You bring them up short. You basically short circuit their unconscious program, the TOTE, the test, operate, test, exit. They've got that NLP thing, where they're just kind of like the handshake, like when it's from the time that the handshake, the initial thing starts to when the handshake concludes, you don't have to think about what you're doing. You just turn it over to your unconscious, and it just takes care of it. Conversationally, that happens from the time that a person says a certain word, that sends you in a happy direction or a mad direction, or that activates your political spiel, or your, well, here's what I don't like about blah blah blah. Okay, I want to take a seat. We're going to be here for a while. Like, you don't have to think, but the spell breaker, like when you don't kind of like play the game with them, they do game step 1. You don't reciprocate with game step 1A or 1B or whatever, or 2. They kind of get short-circuited, and if you short-circuit them in a magical way, it's a spell breaker because it opens up a door through which awareness pours through and just whooshes in, and they realize, well, what's going on? You know what I mean? Something's what's happening here, and all of a sudden they're in touch with reality, what's actually happening, instead of kind of like the veneer of reality that people have been kind of taught to kind of play with politely. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so that, I think, for a lot of it's engineering that for people. And I think that's, that kind of brings in an element of that kind of skillful thing where you're not trying to fix somebody. You're really more trying to activate a particular thing within them that'll fix whatever isn't serving them, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a subtle difference, but it's profound, because this is when you help people in a way where they don't become evangelistic about you and your teaching. They just go off and they just do their life, and from the outside it looks perhaps largely the same. They may be more successful, but they're just more in control. They just have more freedom. Not like freedom TM. They just have regular freedom. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Personal
freedom technique, Oh, have you done personal freedom technique? Have you heard about blah, 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 blah? And they just want to talk about it all the fucking time. And, oh, I did this, and I'm certified in this. And it's just kind of like, who fucking cares? It doesn't, that's all a symbolic substitute for what actually matters, which is, I sat down and I had a conversation with somebody, and as a result of that, something fucking split open inside their head. and as a result of that, their life's never going to be the same again. And that's not something that you can trademark or teach in a weekend seminar, I don't think. You know, you can cover certain things about it, but there's not a technique that's going to accomplish that for people. I mean, one of the things for me is like the measure of success is I want students that don't go around asking other people if they've heard of Stephen Robbins all the fucking time. Because that to me is not a well-adjusted person who every time they meet somebody else or every time they're about to learn something new, they say, well, how does this fit into this? Or, oh, is this like what this guy teaches? That's kind of like, God, you know, that's a non-integrated teaching. That's a conversation topic. That's like I like a Ford Chevrolet GM better than a Ford Chevrolet GM because it's another pastime. You know what I mean? Versus an actual kind of transformation of the person's way of being and model of reality that allows them just to interact with the world in a fundamentally different way so that they don't have to stipulate, oh, I just want you to know that I studied this and I do this and I'm certified in this and this and this. You know, that's a funny statue. That's a different project. And I think about it kind of like, I was thinking about this the other day, like, you know, when you go in the woods and there's the sign that's like leave no trace, you know, this thing. I kind of think about like my work with other people. It's like when I enter into their lives or their mind and we're working together, I follow like a leave no trace policy. And I was thinking about why does the National Forest say that? Like, does it say leave no trace because human beings aren't supposed to be in the forest? No, that's not the point. I think the point is because if the relationship between the human being and the forest is a healthy one, it is such that when that human being leaves, there isn't obvious visual evidence that they were ever there. And that doesn't mean that their being there was insignificant. I think that there's reason to believe that being in the forest is beneficial for human beings. You know, it feels good, it's healthy, it just is good for you. And I mean, on the other end, I can imagine that to the extent that the forest is alive, that the forest benefits from the presence of human beings, right? That it absorbs some kind of nice energy from us in the way that we absorb it from them. I don't know of a lot of genuinely sort of intimate and enriching relationships that are one-sided. Like if I'm, you know, snuggling an animal and I'm a better person for having done that and I feel happier and better, it's hard for me to imagine that the animal's just kind of like, okay, all right, whatever, he likes to do this, maybe he'll feed me later. You know, generally speaking, when there's that kind of really natural desire to do something and it's done kind of consensually in all of this, there's a natural kind of benefit on both sides. And so it seems to me perfectly conceivable that the forest is delighted to have human beings wandering around in them. And to whatever extent the forest experiences delight, I don't know what but there's something there, right? And so in my interactions with other people, one of my things is I kind of enter into your experience or whatever, into your model, you invite me in there, and I'm sort of there. And I certainly benefit from being there. I mean, obviously I benefit professionally and financially. I benefit personally because of all this stuff I've got to play and experiment with, you know, and learn things about myself and test things out. But also just kind of learn things about how people work, and I'm a people, and so what you do tells me something about myself in a way, you know? But also, you benefit. And you benefit in a certain intangible way. I think like the forest benefits from having a person there. Now, I don't want to leave a bunch of my trash around your head, which is I don't want to leave my verbiage, my techniques. I don't want to leave my idiosyncrasies. I don't want to leave some kind of impression that I know things that you could never know, or am somehow or another ascendant in some way, or expert in some way that you could never be, because you thinking that is of no use to either of us. You know what I'm saying? And so there's this kind of relationship where you just kind of go in and you're there, and the forest absorbs your energy, and then it does its thing with it. And so I kind of like to go into a person's life and just kind of be there and let the person sort of, you know, absorb from me whatever they do, and then they make use of it. But then it's not like after I'm in the woods for a couple of days that the tree starts to look like me. I mean, it's not like my face is coming out beside the tree, you know what I mean? It's not talking to all the other trees about me. It's just kind of absorbing the energy or the CO2 or whatever and then using it for stuff. And that's how I like to be in people's lives. That kind of way. Leave no trace. I like to go in and just make someone able to enjoy what it's like to be them more, and then be gone and have their friends and family not necessarily even know that I ever existed. You know, I think that's kind of nice. Instead of going in and, like, you know, plastering pictures of my face all over everything. You're like, yeah, you know what I mean? It's great. That's not my objective. I don't think that makes the forest a prettier place. I don't think it makes people's lives or minds a prettier place. You know what I mean? Have pictures of my face, and I mean, I don't mind my face. It's pretty okay. But I still don't think it has to be plastered all over every fucking corner in the world in order for me to do something useful. And I think that I get the impression that maybe there aren't a lot of people who share that sentiment. You know what I mean? And so I think that's a cool thing. How much profound change can I facilitate or encourage or help a person to create in their life, and then sort of vanish without a trace? Kind of reminds me, there's something about the Tao. The Tao does everything. It's responsible for, I think that would be cool if I could be responsible for, or in some way connected to, profound improvements in literally every area of a person's life, and for them not necessarily to know that it was me that played an important role in all of those things. I think that's kind of cool. What I think is cool if I don't even know that I did it, because that way I don't have to worry about getting too full of myself. And so there's that whole thing that there's this sort of just energy or whatever that just kind of moves around, and it's responsible for everything, but it lays claim to nothing, and it doesn't demand acknowledgement for anything. I want, every time you have a good feeling, I want you to remember that I helped you create it. I mean, that doesn't seem like that would feel very good. I want you to have to talk about things that you've learned from me explicitly for the rest of your life. It's like, no, I'd like for it to be so integrated that at some point you forget about the messenger, the husk that delivered the thing to you. I mean, shit, I wouldn't want to think about me for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't seem very much fun. It should be about something more useful than that, I guess. Like Bob's Red Mill. Like Bob's Red Mill. Everyone loves. I love Bob. I think Bob's a cool guy. But like when you're using his stuff, you don't think about Bob every time you eat something like that. You know what I'm saying? It's just Bob provides you with those things. It's just what he does. He's just kind of subtly there in the background. Look at there, this nice hawk. What's he doing? He's gonna eat something. Look at that. Man, how fun is this? Don't fucking lay.
What's he doing?
No, that's a real sign from someone. That's not just a hawk flying, is what I'm saying. That's a real, somebody's making contact. Or maybe it's just a hawk. Somehow it seems less special if it's someone trying to contact me. But, you know what I'm saying? And I think that that's such a critical thing. Create that awareness moment in that. And I think the other thing too is that that's a thing that can happen at any time, but it's also very easy for it to not happen. And so people kind of, they cease to believe in or even consider the possibility of an instantaneous fix to a problem. You know what I'm saying? And they assume it's got to be hard and difficult and involve, people doing all kinds of stuff to them. And some of those things might be useful. But really the thing in the end, some of those things might be useful for facilitating these awareness moments. But at the end of the day, it can literally happen in an instant. And that problem is just not a problem for you anymore. That really is how that works. You know what I mean? And I think being ever ready and ever primed and ever open to that idea that, like, I had 1,000 problems and then one day I just didn't have any. Or I solved one of them, and solving that one made the other 999 totally different in terms of the impact it had on my experience. And just being ready for that moment and sort of reverent. And doing little things every day to invite that moment to occur, which is I think what the awareness challenge is. And thinking about all these different things and making sense of these things. It's about inviting that magical moment to happen. And I do think there are things that you can do to prepare yourself for it and open yourself up to it and invite it sort of to happen. And that's pretty much everything we do is about that.